welcome to everyone to the Unitarian Universalist Church in Eugene, where empowered by love, we transform ourselves and serve our world. My name is the Reverend Lois Van Leer, she, her, hers, and I am the developmental minister of this church. Today, I am joined in the leadership of worship by our worship associate, Linda Krenneke, our director of music, Mitch Davey, and his fiancée, Kelly, collaborative pianist, Suzanne Giordano, and behind the scenes working tech, Kat Johnson. Welcome to this day, this community, this place and time that reaches across all that holds the potential to divide us or keep us from one another. Welcome to worship, that place where we speak of ultimate meaning and importance right away, where we open ourselves to possibility, where we bring our full and our broken hearts, where we bring our gifts and our needs. Welcome into the circle of the chalice that is deep enough and wide enough to hold each one of us in love. Welcome. As you may know, we are into our second week of the annual pledge drive. This year, we have an anonymous donor who has agreed to match up to a total of $10,000 from new pledges that are made. In other words, if you've never pledged or given money to the church before, that pledge will be matched dollar for dollar up until a total of $10,000, which means that we basically get $20,000 when we thought we were only going to get 10. So if this applies to you, please take advantage of it. You can find a pledge card on our website. You can contact the office. Those of you who have given in the past to the church are being contacted by members of the congregation. And again, if you have any questions, you can call the office or get a hold of me. To those of you who are new to us or visiting this morning, I invite you to fill out the Survey Monkey that is in the chat so that we can have some basic information and send you a hello and welcome you to the community. I'm very excited about next week's service. This is a big coup that Jennifer pulled off, our intern pulled off for us. Meg Riley, one of the co-moderators of our entire denomination and someone who has just recently retired from active ministry, but has been a voice for justice and has run the Church of the Larger Fellowship for us, will be preaching with here in worship next Sunday, and we'll be having a workshop for about, I think, an hour and a half. You better check the newsletter for exact details. But this is an opportunity to find out about what's going on in the denomination, as well as to maybe hear some of the work that Meg has done and get her view on where Unitarian Universalism has been and where it's headed. Welcome, and let us continue with worship.
Our chalice lighting words today are from the Reverend Cynthia Landrum. As we kindle this flame, may it spark in each of us connection and commitment to this living tradition and to each other. Our call to worship is from Reverend Israel Buffardi. The road that lies ahead of us is a long one, and the pace of progress will sometimes feel glacially slow. Never forget that glaciers over time can carve out grand canyons and great lakes. Moving tectonic plates can rise up mountains over millennia, or they can explode awe-inspiring volcanoes in milliseconds.
I invite you now into a time of meditation, a time that allows us to do whatever it is that we need to do to prepare ourselves for worship, to be fully present here. Enter into this space and time open and take from it what you will. Let us relax our bodies or silence our lips or quiet our minds in preparation. Amen. So be it.
Please join us in singing our hymn number 1028, The Fire of Commitment. Our reading this morning is from Rilke. You must give birth to your images. They are the future waiting to be born. Fear not the strangeness you feel. The future must enter you long before it happens. Just wait for the birth, for the hour of new clarity.
This time since last March has been one long season of having our hearts, our minds, and our bodies tried, and on so many levels. If you haven't entertained a mix of fear, disillusionment, anxiety, despair, depression, well, I want to know whatever you're taking. For our bones ache with longing, our hearts yearn for relationship and connection, our minds for a rest from the quagmire of information and unknowns. It has also been a season that has required courage and bravery. A colleague once recently described to me her experience of grocery shopping during the pandemic. Her grocery cart is a protective weapon that she wields and allows her to keep distance between her and other shoppers. If she encounters another person in her aisle, her shoulders reach up to her ears and she hunches forward as if to make herself smaller. All of her senses are on high alert. Fear and fight kick in. Their eyes do not meet. They turn away from one another. The protocol on the walking and hiking paths. If you encounter another walker hiker, Move to the side of the path or trail. Turn your back to the approaching person or group. Let them pass by. Head down, looking to the ground, holding this position until they have gone past. Resume walking or hiking. A congregant said to her minister, "I don't know how to relate to people anymore." Everything in this pandemic takes longer. Tasks that were formerly easy are now complicated. Your church staff used to be able to go up and down the halls of the church, peeking into one another's offices or through the doors to ask questions, to exchange information with ease. Not so when we're working at a distance, reliant on email, Slack, Zoom, texts, and gasp, phone calls. We lament how demoralizing it is to carry on with the same workload without the tools to do our work efficiently and in a timely manner. For many of us, the days and weeks run into one another without much to distinguish them. One day is the same as the next. Ironically, all of this extra time we thought we could use to accomplish all those tasks we never had time for still languish. Somebody recently suggested to me that we write about the losses we've experienced since the pandemic began, to just scribble without editing, a free flow of words. Friendships, the ability to go to a gym or to a yoga class, touch, safety, to be fully out in the world, in-person gatherings with friends or family, going out to eat, going to a movie, to a theater, to a concert, being able to be in person for church and church programs or activities, the ability to be out in the world living our values, volunteering, or maybe taking classes. We see businesses gone out of business without any warning, and we lack social interaction. These are just a few of the losses. It's as if we've become like those astronauts with those big suits inflated, floating out in space after someone cut the line that holds us to the ship. We are free floating in disconnection. This is not normal. I want to say it again. This is not normal. This is the experience of a world as we knew it being wiped out. Gone is what we called normal. Gone is a certainty that the pandemic will end and its impact lessens so as to be almost imperceptible. This is the experience of collective trauma, and it's important that we name it. I define collective trauma as circumstances or experiences out of the ordinary that have an extraordinary impact on individuals and groups. Have you been feeling fear, grief, anger, irritated, helpless, isolated, overwhelmed? You're not alone. Having trouble concentrating or remembering things or sleeping, finding that you are needing something that you're able to control, finding it difficult to make decisions? You're not alone. Collective trauma has been broken down into phases or stages, much like Elizabeth Kubler-Ross broke down dying into phases and stages. But there are two of them that I want to focus on, and they come toward the end of a traumatic event. And the one that I first want to describe is what's called the disillusionment phase, when you hit sort of the bottom. And it's characterized by the realization of limitations of communal efforts. It's characterized by discouragement, continued stress, feelings of abandonment, physical exhaustion, and the negative coping reactions, such as substance use and abuse. The thing that's important to remember about this phase is that it can last months or years, and that it can be reawakened by trigger events or an anniversary of the precipitating event, an anniversary that we all just passed. The reconstruction phase is where that sort of bottom starts to come up. And I don't like the word reconstruction because I so associated it with that time after the Civil War, where it saw first the rise of African Americans being able to be welcomed as full equal citizens, and then having all of that taken away from them. So I've renamed this phase the reimagining phase. And it's characterized by overall feelings of recovery, the rebuilding of lives, adjusting to a new normal, while still continuing to grieve losses. My armchair diagnosis: we are not yet in the reconstruction or reimagining phase, but still fully in the disillusionment phase. We just passed, as I said, that 1-year anniversary of COVID in our world. We are tired of it. We are tired. Riding the roller coaster of the hope and hopelessness. What are the vaccine's limitations? How long will they last? Are they effective with the constantly emerging variants? And what about children? Will we ever reach herd immunity? Yes, we have vaccines, but how long until all of us can access them? And yet still, reimagination is around the corner. Instead of saying we have no idea, for instance, when the church will reopen, we are now projecting possible dates for our return to the building. It may be as late as January of 2022. It could be as early as September of 2021, just in time to begin again with your new settled minister, and perhaps doing church in a new way. But here's a reality that we must come to grips with. The pandemic took away a lot that we took for granted. The pandemic has made us change as a species. That change has allowed us to survive. As a church, we've had to change how we do worship and how we do the work of church. That change has meant survival for our congregation. A few weeks ago, I preached to the Corvallis Unitarian Universalist congregation, and the title of the sermon was Change or Die. Neither society or the church can go back to the previous normal, and the new normal has yet to be created. You know, when it comes to church, many religious professionals have been hanging out in this disillusionment phase for years preceding COVID. We've seen declining numbers, these stalwart churches close, a lot of churches on what's known as hospice care as they're dying out, lack of programs for children that sustain them and work for their families in this changing world. Not to mention the competition from sports that happen seemingly 24/7, 7 days a week. And of course, those programs I've mentioned before, the Moth Radio Hour, Snap Judgment, This American Life, On Being. And remember once again that the place of church in people's lives has shifted. It's no longer the center of life, but it's an addendum to our lives. It's become harder and harder to recruit volunteers to positions of leadership, which ends up recycling lots of leaders and leadership. Almost everything I was taught in divinity school is worthless for today's churches. Many of us lament what no longer works, but we have yet to be able to define what does. And so I'm going to let you in on a not so little secret. We're all making it up as we go along. We are, as church, joining the rest of the world in redefining what the new normal is. When I was recruited to the program chair for the Pacific Northwest Clergy Chapter, I was given a tome of materials and protocols. I had a long call with the previous chair who explained to me in great detail what my responsibilities would be. And so I'd go to these chapter gatherings and I would be on constantly. I would come home not refreshed or renewed, but exhausted. When I passed that torch of leadership, it was picked up by a 30-something. And so I dutifully sent her everything I had been given and then all of my own new materials. So at the next gathering, as I sat back and watched, it was clear that things were going to happen in a new way. In fact, I would learn that the new program chair never read anything I had sent her. And yet I was so impressed by the new model that she had introduced. No one was exhausted. The event went perfectly. And so I thanked that new chair for showing me a new way. And I said, just delete or trash everything I sent you. In this case, everything changed and no one was the worse for wear. The subject of white supremacy culture, the eighth principle, the expansion of and necessity of using pronouns that fit a person's gender or gender expression, the full inclusion of persons who are disabled may seem like they are coming out of nowhere for many of us. It's all new territory. But if you ask today's seminarians what they talk about and they study and work with, they will tell you that they talk about and study and work with these subjects and these issues all the time. This is the new expression of justice work that our faith has always been committed to. Do you remember when inclusive language and feminism were issues for the church? Or the affirmation and ordination of queer clergy? Let me remind you that horrible things were said and done to women and queer folk, not just in the culture at large, but within, yes, Unitarian Universalist churches. You can say, look how far we have come. Change was required of all of us, and it still is. Look at how far we have to go to reimagine and rebuild our beloved faith tradition. Ours is a living tradition that responds, that adopts, that adapts, that expands, that transforms. In our world and in our own church, we're discovering that there is a complexity to issues and problems that require a different style of leadership. Many of us, myself included, were taught a style of what's known as technical leadership. Here's the problem. It needs a solution. Let's fix it. Over and done. Adaptive leadership says that there's more than one answer to any issue or problem. That what we are seeking is not the Messiah to fix it. Adaptive leadership seeks a variety of perspectives. And it acknowledges, and this is really key here, that there's no one right answer, but there is a best answer for a particular community and its values. That the way we have always done it may not be the way we need to do it now. And in fact, that the way we have always done it is no match for the complexity of the issues and problems now facing us. A lay leader at a former church I served was always the first name to come up when someone was needed to lead or accomplish a task. But he'd reached the point in his life when he'd served on all those task forces and committees where he saw his leadership manifesting as mentoring new leaders. He wanted to collaborate with them to enable them to succeed and grow in their own leadership. This change can be defined as a leader is someone in whose presence other leaders are born. What if mentoring and adaptive, collaborative leadership could be the new model? Which brings me to doing church by committee work, or not. You may know that I've started calling committees task forces. Why? Well, as I've said before, committee work sounds endless, formulaic, and never ending. call me ADD, but I find that I will say yes to a one-off task or project as opposed to being locked into something that is a many-year commitment. Though I tend to be a person who plans a year out at a time, I cannot think beyond that framework. I recently named the Accessibility Committee of the ATF, which they loved, even though it does not stand for the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Task Force, but rather the Accessibility Task Force. Similarly, the Ministerial Search Group is called the Ministerial Search Team, or MIST. Why task force or team? Because they imply immediate action and engagement with a task or issue. They have a discrete beginning and a discrete end. Task forces and teams group up, disband, and regroup on various projects. And yes, I'm well aware that we need certain standing committees to meet our legal requirements and to provide a certain stability and overview. Yet the bonus of such task forces or teams is that they are, in essence, small group ministries where people get to know one another, connect more deeply, and care for one another. And this model of forming, disbanding, and reforming allows people to get to know a wider swath of the church and a wider swath of church leadership. It's not healthy for churches to have leaders who serve 6, 10 to 15 years in one position. No one in church leadership should be granted a position for life. Changing it up allows for perspectives that might be able to push through issues or problems that have formerly been sticking points. The other idea that I believe should inform how we will do the work of church in the future is from the Reverend Eric Wickstrom and his book, Serving with Grace. He suggests that any group begin their meeting not with just a mere check-in, but with maybe a half hour of discussion about a topic related to church or faith or spirituality or major life issues. Why? Because he believes that if we deepen our knowledge and connection to one another, the business or task part of our meeting will go more quickly and smoothly. Now, for those of you who happen to have type A personalities, you might find this practice to be initially frustrating because you want to get down to work. But as my former colleague once said, the work of church is not to be efficient. It is to empower people. And as I am overly fond of saying about church, it walks like a duck, it talks like a duck, but the church is not a duck. It's not merely a business. It's not a nonprofit. It has its own peculiarities that defy categorization, which also drives type A folks nuts. The Pacific Western Regional staff of the UUA came up with what they called shift statements to guide their work as they move forward into the future of church. And here they are. Moving from I to we, moving from fear to faith, moving from despair to hope, moving from perfection to wholeheartedness, moving from either or to both and, moving from defensiveness to curiosity, moving from shame to compassion. When Tandy Rogers, who happens to be a member of that group, was serving our area for years and years, she came up with this phrase or two words that I just loved. Expera succeed and expera fail. And I found that those two words gave a great permission, not only for myself, but for lay leadership. Why shouldn't we experiment with gusto without fear of failing, or whatever even failing means? Maybe we try it for 3 months. Maybe the new idea or procedure is brilliant. And maybe it's nothing but confusing and ill-suited to the congregation. Oh, well, we tried, we failed. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. We don't always get it perfect, and some ideas take tweaking, but moving right along. Once again, there's no such thing as perfection. There's only finding the right fit for our particular church. Collaborative leadership, that Lone Ranger dictatorial style of leadership, it's gone. Bye-bye. Collective leadership is not so much about hierarchy, but about the free range and exchange of ideas. It means gathering differing voices and perspectives to hone a way forward. It means appreciating difference and letting that difference help find a new way. It means working together alongside of one another in partnership. My bottom line for church work is, what is essential and what are we passionate about? You can't find people to just staff or fill out that committee. That's important information. Maybe that group or focus has seen its day. It's okay to let go of things. It's okay to find new ways to get the essential tasks of the church done. It is invigorating to a church community to find its passion. Fewer committees, more task forces, a refining of who UUCE is, what it is, and how we will live into that. I recently made an executive decision. I declared the church closed the week after Easter, April 5th through 10th. Not merely shut as it continues to be, but closed, as in no activities, no Zoom meetings or gatherings except Harvest the Power, which is a new initiative around leadership. Ministers in Christian churches are often gone the week after Easter. I decided that it was enough already with all the pressures of COVID, that we all needed time to reflect and renew and reset ourselves, a sort of extended Sabbath time for all of us. When your ministerial search team was trying to reach out to as many folks as possible in the congregation, they discovered something. They had focused so hard on the folks that did not use computers or email that they failed to be as effective in reaching a whole other population in the church, those who don't use email or Facebook or even text. Many of these folks were on other social media platforms. Any communication that is not electronic won't reach many folks these days. Paper doesn't work for them, which brings up the question of how will UUCE best communicate in the future? And what is effective communication in these times? What is enough information or too much information? Worship. Well, whether Zoom has been the bane of your existence or a gift during COVID, one thing is certainly true. It has increased access to our worship for many, not just those who are no longer able to physically get out and about, but for those who may be ill or have sick children or whose weekend plans do not allow them to attend church on Sunday mornings. Recording our services allows folks to watch them on their own time rather than just have missed it all and be excluded. We will use a hybrid format when returning to gathering for church in person, in that we will continue to use Zoom. We will continue to post our services on our YouTube channel. And my guess is that we will use more video in our services. We'll feel freer to explore not only different ways of doing worship, but different formats. No, we aren't throwing out the content or even the familiar, but it will most likely be packaged differently. There are many who advocate not only for full community worship, meaning all ages together worshiping, but they are also advocating for learning faith formation as a full community. When it comes to worship, if you make it more accessible for children, you'll be making it more accessible for adults. Are you worried that the children will squirm and need to move and disrupt? There are adults who have the same need. Why can't we reconfigure our spaces that we have at the church to accommodate those needs. And now more than ever, we've become aware that there are many of us who are neurodivergent rather than neurotypical. How can we shape worship to include those who are considered divergent and those who are considered the typical? We need to stop expecting folks to conform or face exclusion. And as for faith formation, there are many religious educators who are advocating for that full community faith formation, as in not separating children and youth and young adults and all other ages from one another as we learn. Think about it, church is one of the last places that we as a society can interact across generations. We need to do away with putting children on display for things like the story and let them be seen for who they are in our interactions with them. If faith formation is about how we learn what our UU values are and how to live them out, shouldn't we all be doing that together rather than separated from one another? Of course, not all subject matter is appropriate developmentally for all ages together, but surely there is more that is than isn't. Personally, I find this phase of disillusionment in terms of the future of church to be incredibly exciting, because I see that the chaos we've been living with in terms of what church is in people's lives and its role in society to be fertile ground for what might come. Nothing is certain except uncertainty. There's no game plan, no rule book, no blueprint. We are making it up as we go along. And we do so with a newfound freedom and permission. What we do know is that we cannot wrap a 21st century church in a 19th century framework. Frankly, we have nothing to lose. To the chaos, add imagination, and we have the future. In some ways, the future, it's already here. It's not a matter of choosing the future. It's a matter of catching up to that future that is already breaking into our present. Reimagining church and the work of church does not feel daunting, but invigorating. It feels exciting. It feels like making the impossible possible, the merely imagined reality. Commenting on the famous words of Rabbi Tarfon, "You are not required to finish your work, yet neither are you permitted to desist from it." Michael Fertig says, "You have an obligation to labor, to continue trying and making your way through the world, in essence, making a difference. At the same time, the instruction also focuses you on the effort, not the outcome. The main idea is the project, not the success. I am hopeful for the project of taking chaos and imagination and creating the future of church." I'm not so hopeful or clear about a way forward through the COVID pandemic. Politics and global economic inequality have been as deadly as the virus. Someone wrote that we cannot micromanage our way out of pandemic pain, and I'm not sure we can macromanage our way out of it either. I don't know what reimagining looks like in terms of social interaction and norms. I think of the children who've been deprived of over a year of social interaction and therefore social development. Think of all those folks pushing grocery carts in the aisles, like my colleague, and about what it will take to shift fear into ease. Will we hug freely? Will we shake hands? Will we be washing our hands with the same frequency? What will be the new norms around social interaction? How will a year of isolation affect our ability to relate to one another? Will we carry over into our future some of the positive things that shaped our lives during COVID, the things that this morning's story talked about? Will some of the essentials of our lives that we recovered in COVID go by the wayside again? Do we as a society know how to collectively grieve what we've been through, what has been lost? How long will it take for us to regain our creativity and imagination. My sense is that the church will play an important role in the movement from societal disillusionment to reimagination. Because if church is indeed the place where we practice what it means to be human, we will have need of church. For we will need to practice again what it means to be human and in relationship, to move from isolation and loneliness into community again. It is not so much about practicing old ways of being, but of creating new ways of being in relationship and community that are truly sustaining and nurturing. These are chaotic times, yet tethered to imagination, we will find a way forward, a future. As the poet Rilke wrote, "You must give birth to your images. They are the future waiting to be born. Fear not the strangeness you feel. The future must enter you long before it happens. Just wait for the birth, for the hour of new clarity. May it be so. Blessed be." Whether if you have come here today with your hearts full to brimming, or if you are bringing some piece of pain or brokenness, there is room for all of that here to be shared. I invite you to share your joys or your sorrows in this time by using the chat. Even though we've been talking about change today, everything that's been shared in the chat, our joys and sorrows, reminds me that our lives are still filled with some of the same things. We still are diagnosed with illnesses. Those we love die. Some are able to receive the vaccination, some are not. We are still separated and isolated from those whom we love. There's still joy in a new puppy, in a chance to see one another. There's hope that's blooming because of the vaccinations. There's hope that we can be together again, gathered physically in one space to celebrate all of what life brings us. As you go forward from this service today, please carry all the joys and sorrows that have been shared here today and hold them with you until we meet again.
Today's offering will be received, and the offerings in March, all this month, go to the Farm Worker Emergency Fund at Pineros y Campesinos Unidos del Oeste, PICUN, Oregon's largest Latino union, which empowers farm workers and working Latinx families. Farm workers and their families have been severely impacted by COVID-19, as well as the economic fallout. In keeping with the worship theme for March, which is commitment, please commit whatever you can to those in desperate need. For additional information about PICUN, go to their website. May these offerings of our lives be transformed, that lives may be transformed. Please join us for our closing hymn, number 1017, Building a New Way.
Hear these words from Henry Nelson Wyman. Inevitably in our lives, we commit ourselves to something, whether worthy or not. The direction and intensity of our loyalties give shape and meaning to our lives. Loyalties, commitments, covenants, the promises we make to one another. These are the things that tell us to what we belong. By doing so, they tell us who we are. So be it. Blessed be. Amen.